true creepy and unexplained urban exploring stories. Story 1: The Abandoned Asylum. In the summer of 2018, a group of friends decided to explore an old, abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. The asylum, rumored to be haunted, had been shut down in the 1960s due to reports of abuse and mistreatment of patients. The building had fallen into disrepair, with boarded-up windows and overgrown weeds covering the grounds. The friends arrived at dusk, armed with flashlights and cameras. The atmosphere was eerie, with the wind rustling through the trees and the distant hoot of an owl. As they entered the main building, the temperature seemed to drop, and an unsettling silence enveloped them. The interior of the asylum was in ruins. Paint peeled off the walls, and debris littered the floors. As they moved deeper into the building, they stumbled upon old patient files scattered across a room. The files contained disturbing notes about the patient's treatments, including electroshock therapy and isolation. One of the friends, Emily, felt a cold hand brush against her arm. She turned around, but no one was there. Shaken, she told the others, who dismissed it as nerves. They continued exploring, finding an old operating room with rusty surgical tools still laid out on the table. The room felt heavy with a sense of suffering and despair. Suddenly, they heard footsteps echoing down the hall. They froze, their flashlights darting towards the sound. A shadowy figure appeared at the end of the corridor, motionless and staring at them. Panic set in, and they quickly retraced their steps, only to find that the figure had vanished. As they hurried back to the entrance, Emily noticed something strange in one of the photographs she had taken. The image showed a faint, ghostly figure standing behind them in the operating room. The figure resembled a woman in a hospital gown, her face twisted in anguish. The friends left the asylum unnerved by their experience. They later researched the history of the asylum and discovered that a nurse had committed suicide in the operating room after being accused of mistreating patients. The photograph and their encounter with the shadowy figure left them convinced that the asylum was indeed haunted by restless spirits. Story 2: The Deserted Factory. In the fall of 2019, Jake and his friends, avid urban explorers, decided to venture into an abandoned factory on the outskirts of their city. The factory, once a bustling hub of activity, had been closed for decades. Stories circulated about strange occurrences and ghostly sightings within its walls. The group arrived early in the morning, the rising sun casting long shadows across the decaying building. They entered through a broken window and found themselves in a vast, empty hall filled with rusted machinery and crumbling walls. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was oppressive. As they explored the factory, they came across a series of tunnels that led to the basement. The tunnels were dark and claustrophobic, and a sense of unease settled over them. Jake felt like they were being watched, but he couldn't see anyone else around. In the basement, they discovered old office spaces filled with discarded furniture and papers. One room stood out. It was an old break room with a single light bulb that flickered intermittently. On the wall, someone had scrawled "Help us" in red paint. The sight sent chills down their spines. Jake decided to set up a voice recorder, hoping to capture any paranormal activity. As they waited, they heard faint whispers and the sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. They checked, but no one was there. The whispers grew louder, as if surrounding them, yet remained unintelligible. Later, when they reviewed the recording, they heard a clear, desperate voice saying, "Get out." It was followed by a loud crash, even though nothing had fallen or moved while they were in the room. The group decided it was time to leave, feeling the factory's oppressive energy weighing them down. After returning home, Jake researched the factory's history. He discovered that several workers had died in an accident in the basement tunnels, and their bodies were never recovered. The whispers and the plea for help made sense. Now the spirits of the trapped workers were still seeking a way out. Jake and his friends never returned to the factory, but the experience left a lasting impression on them. The voice recorder's chilling message served as a stark reminder of the unexplained and the eerie presence that lingered in the abandoned factory. Story 3: The Haunted Schoolhouse. In the spring of 2020, a group of urban explorers, including Sarah and her boyfriend Mark, decided to investigate an abandoned schoolhouse in a small, rural town. The school had been closed for decades, and locals whispered about strange noises and ghostly apparitions seen on the grounds. They arrived in the late afternoon, the dilapidated building standing eerily silent against the backdrop of overgrown weeds and broken playground equipment. As they entered the schoolhouse, a musty odor filled the air, and the wooden floors creaked under their weight. Inside, they found old desks and chalkboards covered in dust. The walls were adorned with faded educational posters, and the remnants of children's artwork lay scattered on the floor. The atmosphere was heavy with a sense of abandonment and lost innocence. Sarah and Mark made their way to the second floor, where they discovered the principal's office. Inside, they found old records and photographs of students from the 1950s. One photograph caught their attention. It showed a young girl with a sad expression, standing alone at the edge of the playground. As they continued exploring, they heard the faint sound of children laughing and running down the hall. They followed the noise but found nothing. The laughter turned into cries, echoing through the empty corridors. The temperature dropped suddenly, and a feeling of dread washed over them. In one of the classrooms, they noticed a small, dusty piano. Mark, a musician, couldn't resist playing a few notes. As he played, the cries grew louder, and they both saw a shadowy figure of a young girl standing by the window, staring at them with hollow eyes. Terrified, they ran back downstairs, only to find the front door locked. Panicking, they searched for another exit. Sarah felt a cold hand grip her shoulder and turned to see the ghostly figure of the same girl from the photograph. The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out. Instead, a voice echoed in Sarah's mind, saying, "Help me." Finally, they managed to break a window and escape. Outside, they found the locals waiting, drawn by the commotion. An elderly woman approached them and told them about the tragedy that had befallen the school. The young girl in the photograph had died in a fire that had consumed part of the building. Her spirit was said to be trapped, unable to move on. Sarah and Mark left the town, haunted by their encounter. They shared their story with others, hoping to bring attention to the restless spirit of the young girl. The experience left them with a deep sense of sadness and a newfound respect for the unexplained.